Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Schulman, when you learned that conservative groups were being targeted by the IRS for discriminatory treatment, what did you do?
When I learned of the existence of a BOLO list, in that same conversation or right around that time, I also learned a couple things. One, that it was being stopped. So that
all right, and who told you it was being stopped?
That's Steve Miller, my deputy.
All right, and did you investigate further? Can you give me the name of a single person who was involved in the original decision to target conservative groups for disparate treatment?
I'm not aware of those names.
Why can't you give me a name?
So at the same time that I learned and that it was being stopped, I was also told that the Inspector General was aware of it.
Mr. Schulman, is the Inspector General the only person who can investigate wrongdoing within the IRS?
My general practice...
Can you answer my question and then you can explain? Is the Inspector General the only entity who can investigate wrongdoing?
Congress can investigate.
How about you? Can you do it?
The practice at the Internal Revenue Service that I inherited.
So if there's inappropriate conduct being done on your watch in the IRS, then that inappropriate conduct can last as long as the Inspector General's investigation lasts. Is that what you're telling me? That you're not going to step in and stop it?
No, what I'm telling you
If there's someone wielding a knife in the parking lot, are you going to call the Inspector General? Are you going to wait until his or her investigation's over before you stop it?
When I was told about these allegations, I was also told that they were being stopped, and so that the inappropriate criteria were not being used
anymore. And despite the seriousness and potential criminality of that conduct, you didn't investigate it yourself at all?
So the procedures that I inherited and that my
Mr.
general
Schulman,
practice
this is going to go much quicker if you'll answer yes or no, and then you can explain. Did you do anything to verify that the practice, as insidious as it was stopped?
The Inspector General was going to be looking into it, and that's what...
Is it that you can't say yes or no, or you're just choosing not to say yes or no? Can you answer the question, did you do anything personally to make sure that this insidious, discriminatory practice was stopped? Yes or no?
At the time that I learned about it, I also learned two things. The first was that it was being stopped, and the second was that the Inspector
And what did you do to verify that it was stopped?
The responsible deputy of the Internal Revenue Service told me it was being stopped. I had no reason to believe otherwise.
Did you investigate why conservative groups were being targeted?
Excuse me?
Did you investigate? So you can't give me a single name. You can't answer the who. Can you tell me the why? Why were conservative groups? Why was the culture such under your watch that an employee felt comfortable targeting conservative groups? Did you investigate that?
You know, from my reading of the report, I can't tell if it was political motivation or if it was tone deaf, somebody trying to expedite a way.
You still don't know that this was political.
Excuse me?
You still don't know that this was political?
I'd defer to the Inspector General.
Well, I'll tell you this, Mr. Schulman. Your predecessor said that he wasn't sure if it was partisan, and that requires the listener to be as stupid as the speaker to utter a comment like that. He just testified that policy positions dictated this. What does that mean to you? If it's not partisan, what does that mean?
I'm not sure I heard that testimony.
Well, we'll be sure and get you a copy of the transcript, and you can supplement your testimony. How's that? Do you agree with Dan Pfeiffer?
Committee's questions.
Do you agree with Dan Pfeiffer that the law is irrelevant, or do you think it is relevant?
I think the law is always relevant.
Do you think 26 U.S.C. 7214, which provides for criminal penalties for this conduct, would be relevant? And did you refer the matter to someone with law enforcement investigative jurisdiction?
I'm not going to speculate what's appropriate legally in this matter, and Mr. George, I knew his operation was looking at it, I believe.
I thought it was an audit. I thought he just testified it was an audit, not an investigation. Did you refer it for criminal investigation?
I didn't refer it. It was already being looked into at the time that it was brought to my attention.
So I want to be real clear because my time is out. The only recourse you have when there's an allegation of wrongful conduct on your watch, the only thing you feel comfortable doing is waiting on an inspector general to finish his or her report.
The general practice is to make sure the inspector general will look into it.
No matter how insidious the conduct. If it were an allegation of racial discrimination, you would have waited until Mr. George finished his investigation? Is that your testimony?
I'm really not going to answer hypotheticals.
I tell you what, instead of answering a hypothetical, why don't you answer the case at bar today? If there's an allegation that groups are being discriminated against based on political ideology, are you really going to wait until an inspector general finishes his or her report before you take corrective remedial action?
When I have a fact, but I don't have all the facts, and I don't know the scope and severity.
Did you investigate the facts, Mr. Schulman? Did you lift a finger to identify the facts?
I felt very comfortable. The facts, the Inspector General was going to run down the facts, and once he had it, it would be reported out.
Let the record reflect that's a no.
I thank the gentleman. I know you guys have been there a long time. We appreciate your patience.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commissioner, you're an attorney. Can you explain for our fellow citizens what the phrase spoliation of evidence means?
I have no idea what that means.
Well, I'm going to help you with it, okay? Spoliation of evidence is when a party fails to preserve, there's a negative inference that the jury can draw from their failure to preserve the evidence. You with me? If you destroy documents, the jury can infer that those documents weren't going to be good for you. If you fail to keep documents, the jury can infer that those documents were not going to be good for you. You've heard the phrase spoliation of evidence, haven't you?
I can't recall ever hearing it.
It's true in administrative hearings, civil hearings, criminal hearings.
I practiced law once 45 years ago, gave it up for Lent one year, never went back.
All right. Well, let me tell you what you would have found if you had stuck with it. When a party has a duty to preserve evidence or records and they fail to do so, there is a negative inference that is drawn from their failure to preserve the evidence. It's common sense, right? If you destroyed something, the jury has a right to infer that whatever you destroyed would not have been good for you, or else every litigant would destroy whatever evidence was detrimental to them. Agreed?
I'm not sure. I think if you destroy the evidence and people could prove it, it wouldn't be a good thing for your defense.
Well, no, it's worse than that. The jury can draw, and they're instructed, they can draw a negative inference.
All right.
And that's true if a taxpayer is being sued by the IRS administratively, civilly, or prosecuted criminally, and they fail to keep documents, the jury can draw a negative inference from the fact that they didn't keep receipts or emails or documents. So if it's true and applies to a taxpayer, it ought to apply to the IRS as well. Agreed?
Is this a trial? Is this a jury? Is that what you're...
I said administrative, civil, or criminal. If you want to go down that road, I'm happy to go down it with you, Commissioner. In fact, I'm glad you mentioned it. You have already said multiple times today that there was no evidence that you found of any criminal wrongdoing. I want you to tell me what criminal statutes you've evaluated.
I have not looked at any.
Well, then how can you possibly tell our fellow citizens that there's no criminal wrongdoing if you don't even know to look at?
Because I've seen no evidence that anyone consciously...
Well, how would you know what elements of the crime existed? You don't even know what statutes are at play. I'm going to ask you again. What statutes have you evaluated?
I think you can rely on common sense that nothing I have seen...
Common sense. Instead of the criminal code, you want to rely on common sense. No, you can shake your head all you want to, Commissioner. You have said today that there's no evidence of criminal wrongdoing. And I'm asking you what criminal statutes you have reviewed to reach that conclusion.
I've reviewed no criminal statute.
All right, so you don't have any idea whether there's any criminal conduct or not because you don't know the elements of the offense.
I've seen no evidence of wrongdoing.
Oh, well, that's very different than no evidence of criminal misconduct, Commissioner.
Well, it seems to me if you haven't done wrongdoing, it'd be pretty hard to argue that you've had some criminal violation if you didn't.
Well, what did Lois Lerner mean when she said perhaps the FEC will save the day?
I have no idea.
What did she say? What did she mean when she said we need a project, but we need to be careful that it doesn't appear to be per se political? You don't think that's a potential violation of 18242?
I have no idea if it...
Because you haven't looked at 18242, and you don't have any idea, Commissioner, you don't have any idea whether there's any criminal wrongdoing or not.
With regard to the production of the evidence, the production of Lois Lerner emails, I have seen no evidence of wrongdoing. What else went on?
Well, if there were, that would be a separate criminal offense.
What else went on with Lois Lerner, I said in the past.
So what you're saying is you don't have any idea whether she engaged in criminal wrongdoing. You're just saying that you did not engage in any with respect to the email.
I haven't seen any wrongdoing with regard to the production of Lois Lerner emails.
But you are not saying there was no criminal wrongdoing with respect to the targeting of conservative groups. I want to be very clear. You're not saying that.
I've made no judgments.
So you disagree with the president when he says there's not a smidgen of corruption.
There are people who have been making judgments both sides about whether there were.
You know what? I'm not one of those. I'm just simply saying we will never know because you didn't keep the evidence. The evidence was spoliated. And whether it's negligent, whether it's intentional, whether it's reckless, we still don't have the evidence, Commissioner.
Well, you have the evidence that there is no emails from the White House. You have all of the Treasury emails. So the basic premise that this was an argument in a conspiracy driven by the White House does not.
No, sir, you're wrong about that. You're wrong about that. That you're repeating a talking point from our colleagues on the other side that we're obsessed with the White House. It was Jay Carney who perpetuated the myth that it was 2 rogue agents in Ohio. It wasn't any of us. Was that accurate? Was that first initial line of defense that this is just 2 rogue agents in Ohio? Was that accurate, Commissioner?
Not that I know of.
All right, so that wasn't accurate, and that came from the White House. Who said there's not a smidgen of corruption? Who said that, Commissioner?
My understanding is that was the president.
Or it was the president. So that's Jay Carney and the president both inserting themselves into the IRS scandal. And you want to blame us for bringing the White House into it?
I haven't blamed you at all.
You just did, Commissioner. You just did.
Well, it's a good argument. All I said was the White House has revealed there were no Lois Lerner emails. Treasury has given you all of their emails. So to the extent that the argument was that Lois Lerner was conspiring and emailing back and forth, thus far I haven't seen any.
But you can be engaged in a conspiracy that doesn't include the White House.
Gentlemen.
Good. Time's up. Right. Thank you, sir.
Well, I was wanting to let him go, but the guy beside him kept grabbing me.